Hello and welcome to The Navel Gaze, a podcast about autosexuality. I am Tolly Botts. This is Aaron Terrell, my co-host, and today we are joined by Schyler, Miss Schyler, on social media. Schyler is someone that I first came across on Benjamin Boyce's channel, I believe, and started following her on Twitter. I may have even reached out to you after I watched your episode. I did that with a few people whose stories kind of resonated with me. And yeah, I think you call yourself unremarkably trans. You are someone who probably doesn't need to be in this conversation because it seems like you live a pretty integrated life. And if you didn't, you don't need to take the risks basically of putting yourself in the line of fire and having these difficult and polarizing conversations. So I'm glad that you are, because I think it adds to the discourse. It adds to the face of trans, for lack of better terms. And certainly adds to the face of autogynephilia, everyone's least favorite word. And so that's what we're here to talk to you about today. So welcome, Schyler.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I mean, I think a lot of what you said rings true. I definitely was purposely not online for a long time because I just wanted to live my life and enjoy, not, I don't know, like you said, all the baggage and all the issues that can come from just, putting so much of your story out online. I personally don't really ever talk about AGP or autogynephilia. I just call it autosexuality, just like your podcast does. Because from my experience, it's totally a sexuality. And also just the fact of someone that isn't as familiar with this subject matter coming across it, and then it potentially having repercussions in areas of my life that I don't anticipate. So I'm just I stick to using the word autosexuality a lot, but of course, the literature has a way of defining it around AGP and that concept. So, I'm totally familiar with that. And I'm happy to be here. I like your podcast. So
thank you. Yeah, we use the word autosexuality too, like you said. And I think we think of it as just some sort of an umbrella term. And really, it's not just an umbrella term for autogynephilia and autoandrophilia, if it exists, which, we're autoandrophilia truthers on this podcast. But it's inclusive of other erotic target identity inversions too. And so there are other sort of inverted sexual attractions that manifest in people. Some of the even more stigmatizing and less common identities, like furry identities, like sort of cross age identities, things like this. And so I do think that's a more approachable word, and also just people might understand it a little quicker, even if they don't know exactly what it means. Autosexuality, it puts it in the realm of okay, so it's some type of self-oriented sexuality. I've seen a lot of people not pushing back on that, but just sort of being well, that's not what autosexuality is. Autosexuality is someone who only masturbates or something like that. And that was something that Aaron and I kind of talked about in our earlier episodes, is what we see as the sort of misunderstanding or stigmatization of autosexuality, but it's still stigmatized less than autogynephilia. So I don't blame you. And yeah, we're happy using those words too. But yeah, if you don't mind, well, I'll see if Aaron wants to chime in because I'm hogging the mic already. But I figure we'll have you kind of go through your story. You can tell us how old you are, a little bit about yourself. And then we want to know kind of your journey of transition, when you first started having sort of a cross-sex identity and what the process of transition was for you. And then when autogynephilia came into your purview, when you heard about it and when that made sense for your story. But Aaron, do you have anything to say?
Nothing for me. Yeah, no, you got it all there. Just your biographical background, as it were, and then we can kind of we'll probe as it goes. But
definitely,
yeah, and please do. I have a tendency to ramble when I'm just given the floor, so please just jump in if you have anything you want to say. And I just want to say too, before I I start doing my thing. Aaron, I'm so sad I didn't like really get to meet you at the Gen Spec conference back in.
I didn't even know you were there. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Until you said on the Dollcast. Yeah.
I was a small fish in a much bigger pond, or bigger sea, I guess, at that conference. So it was kind of by design. You didn't know I was there. No one really knew that I was there because no one really knew me. So
yeah, I think it was after that I saw your Gen Spec, which is also how I became familiar with you. Same as like what Tali just said.
Yeah.
But yeah. Sorry, I was you can carry on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just didn't know that you like were in the like more science, like autosexuality space. And if I had, I definitely would have made a point of saying something to you, because I definitely said hi to Phil and a couple other people, especially Benjamin Boyce. And anyways, okay. I'll go ahead and
one day in the
start.
future,
Yeah.
we'll all get together one day. So
we should.
That's what I tell myself, at least. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So, okay. So where to start? So, I guess I'll start where I started with the Benjamin Boyce interview, because I think this actually has something related to the discussion. And that is that, when I was young, so I grew up in a very happy, healthy Christian conservative family, just to kind of start the premise here. No trauma, no abuse. I was disciplined a lot as a kid. But I think it was truly out of love and just like a product of the environment that my parents were used to with the church upbringing. But when I was young, pretty much as early as I can remember, I had this strange proclivity to expressing myself, and my family had a term for it because I did it so often. And it was called my pretending. And basically what this was is when I was little, I would go outside and just make believe. I would do like imaginative embodiment of different characters that I would see like on TV or in movies, most predominantly in like that kind of media, but it could also be a book or just any story where there was like a character that I was like, oh, that's interesting, or that's exciting to me. And I would just go outside and just like entertain myself for hours, to the point where my parents were like legitimately worried about it after a while, because I wasn't seeming to outgrow this. But I would do this and I would self-entertain myself for a long time. And I have younger brothers. So they, why that matters is like, I would even pretend at the exclusion of playing with them at times. Not all the time. I would play with them, but there were many more times where they would want to play with me and I wouldn't be interested because I was having so much fun in my own like pretend world outside, just, doing make believe or whatever. Anyways, in retroactive, like looking back at this, I think I've thought a lot about this because it is seemingly a very unusual proclivity for me, versus like a lot of my friends or like people I knew. And so I think I was like wiring up my sexuality actually in a way, by just pretending and embodying different characters. I would pretend as guys or girls. I was more conscious about when I role play as girls because I knew that like wouldn't be received well by my parents, just being in a more traditional setting. But guys, I was like, that was totally fine. I would just, act out all different scenes. I wanted to play all the parts. That was the big thing. Okay, but that's just a little background tidbit. When I was young, I had a lot of dreams when I would sleep. I mean, we all kind of have dreams. But my dreams were very much, I just remember having a lot of dreams of being a girl in my dreams. And these were my favorite dreams. And this is like at the tender ages of 6 to 8. So not like later on, but younger. And I'm a girl in these dreams. And really all that means is that I have long hair and I'm wearing a dress. Because you might think like, what do you mean you're a girl in your dream? Like, what does that mean? And so like, I was just that visual representation, and I love these dreams, but I didn't really think too much of them. To be honest, they were just my favorite dreams. It was just all I really knew. But I didn't tell anyone about them because again, I just knew wouldn't be received well. And so moving forward a little bit, my first experience of really being like, I don't know if I would say like unhappy is the right word, but strongly thinking about being the opposite sex, or like when I actually really wanted to be the opposite sex. The first times I like ideated this way was when I was 8 years old. And I remember this because my family was moving at the time. So we were living at my grandparents' house. And that helps me frame my memory. So I know I'm not like, what's it called? Retconning or whatever it is when you like make believe things. It's very important to me. I don't do that because I see that happen so much. And I don't think that helps the discourse, for lack of a better term. And so, yeah, but I actually like remember praying out loud. I was taking a bath, and I remember praying out loud that God would just turn me into a girl, in the kind of scenario where like there is no transition. It's just like I was born a girl from the start kind of thing. Yeah, just like wake up and I'm a girl and life's great. And
do you think this might be a weird question, but do you think part of like praying for it in the bath had to do with like being naked and sort of being like not in a sexual way, but just faced with your body, basically? Like, do you think it was a body thing or not necessarily? I don't know how aware you were of the differences in bodies, but I'm curious about that.
That's a really good question.
If it's not salient in one way or the other, then it might not matter. But
I think it's not salient. Yeah. Yeah. It's tempting to think that because yes, I was obviously naked in the bathroom, but I don't know, like, I don't want to go off and say, oh yeah, that was why.
Right.
When you were younger and you were doing the whole character performance thing, did you have? I know you're saying that obviously you were more self-conscious when you were role playing as one of the female characters you were interested in, because obviously, yeah, you're gonna be like, who's seeing me do this or whatever, like, who's judging me. But did you have like a pull, like more of a pull to embody the female characters than the male characters, or were you pretty much indifferent to it? But then obviously that emotion of like judgment and shame of doing the female characters.
It's a good question.
That is, I think I just wanted to feel or like imagine what it would be like as either character. And I wouldn't have said I was pulled towards, honestly, I'd say I was probably more pulled towards the guy characters because I didn't have to worry about who was watching me. So like, it just felt easier to do that, but I didn't want to just experience that perspective. I wanted to imagine both sides for the whole dynamic of what that would be like in my mind. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you envision yourself, if this again might be hard to really remember because we're talking about such a young age, but do you recall, were you envisioning yourself as these characters? Like, was there a transformation element, or was it more like you're saying, like wanting to get into the heads of these different perspectives?
The best way I could describe it would be like the physical world around me. Even though I was cognizant of where I was physically, my mind was immersed in like overlaying an imaginary world. So like it didn't really matter where I was as long as I was kind of away from people enough to be in my own like environment where I wouldn't be disrupted. And the important thing was acting on the part of the character I was playing. And so was that your question?
Kind of, yeah. I guess I'm sort of getting at like a behavioral versus anatomic distinction, even though again this is sort of like pre-puberty, but it's like, is it really imagining like how I would look as these various characters and maybe even the transformation of myself into these things, or is it more embodying the social reality or the mind?
Yes. The social reality, the feeling, less about the physicality. Like I wouldn't use any props. I wouldn't use any, it wasn't really about the props for me. It was very much about what would be the perceptions, what would be the emotions, the role playing. It was really about the role.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
Are you a writer?
Just like coming to realize this. Yeah.
Are you a writer by any chance? Just seems like a mental propensity that would lead someone to becoming an author, is what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
I always preferred writing to math. So that is definitely true, but I'm not, and I have had periods in my life where I did write a lot. But I'm not like in a current phase of life where I'm writing a lot or any of that.
Fair enough.
No.
Fair enough. So it was a side tangent, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love this though. Great questions. Anyway, so back to the praying. So the bathtub was a distinct memory for the praying, but I also do remember going to sleep at night and praying the same prayer more than once, like a lot. I would say like probably on average like once a month. But this wouldn't always continue. This was like, I remember this for a distinct period of time around 8 to 9 years old, and then it was sort of off and on. Where I would really want to be a girl, but I just didn't have words to explain or express how I felt. Just totally like straight up. I just didn't know how to explain it. I just wanted to be a girl, and that was about all I could have said.
Did you, I grew up in a quite similar environment to you, a conservative Christian upbringing, and then obviously having the whole again, I know as children wouldn't have understood it as being sexual in any way, so it's weird to use the word autosexual, but I desperately wished I was a boy, right? But I was very much ashamed of feeling that way. And I was constantly being, because I did a lot of what you were doing, except I was always a male. In like, I would never see like a female character and be like, oh, I want to act out, but I only wanted to just kind of like be these different male characters, usually cowboys, like from Westerns or whatever that I was into. But I was able to do that because I was playing with my brother and his friends most of the time, and I was just like, we were just like part of the same, gang essentially. And so it was very easy to be co-playing with other children while still in my kind of fantasy land. But I remember like not feeling embarrassed to be a boy, like playing a male character amongst my friends, but I was very embarrassed about the reality that I did wish I were male or wish I had been born a boy. Did you have that kind of shame? Like did part of your inability to communicate that have something to do with shame about that feelings, or how your family would react? Because I remember being constantly told that God made you a girl, God doesn't make mistakes, things like that. And I think, I'm not sure how much that fed the shame feeling, but anyway, I'm just curious about your experience there with similar upbringing.
That's a great question. And I think I would have to say like, I probably did, but I wouldn't have described that as like a cornerstone emotion of the experience. I think the shame element would be more would play a bigger role later on in my life, when it was like the dysphoric part of myself was just more of a reality and less of like an intermittent, like just kind of moving on in life and not really, just not having like the disruptive elements of dysphoria shaping me at this time. Because it was just very much like an on and off thing that wasn't as intense. I mean, it was intense, but it was like very short-lived and very defined moments. Whereas like later on that it becomes a lot more persistent and just regular routine feeling.
Fair.
Yeah. So then I guess like, just kind of moving ahead, because there's not really any other milestones up until I think I hit puberty, and now there is a milestone. This is when things distinctly take a different turn. They do take that like sexual turn of, I'm having dreams now, and testosterone is now coursing through me. I am a, young teenage boy. I've just learned like the anatomical differences, the birds and the bees talk, that whole thing. And I start having dreams. And in my dreams, I am anatomically a female now. And these are extremely powerful dreams. Intense. I like them, but I'm also confused quite a bit because I don't know what to make of it. But this happens. I mean, it's just a, experience that kind of just came. This was really the moment where I think like I realized there was something distinctly different about me. And I'm a curious person. I've always thought more information, the better. And so that approach sort of took me to the internet, AOL dial-up in these times.
Yeah, about what time frame was this actually?
The mid 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, fledgling internet, Wikipedia exists. Google's out there. Facebook, I guess, is there. MySpace is there, but like all the other stuff doesn't exist really. Social media, like YouTube and all that, is like, if it exists, it's extremely bare. There's like nothing happening really. But I do remember going online, and this is where I came across the typology. By just searching, and I did find other explanations too, like the gender identity one, or what I would consider like the gender ideology explanation. And I just remember reading the various descriptions, and I read about the Blanchard's work with the AGP and the HSTS typology,
you read about this at like 13
or 14. I honestly don't know exactly which age. I think I was maybe just turned 14.
Pretty young though. Yeah.
Very young. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was able to find it. I mean, from what I hear now, it's like some people are really shocked that I was able to find it. But like, honestly, if you search like the right things, you will find it. Like, I don't think it's that hard to come across, but I think it serves a narrative for people not to have thought that they knew it. So.
Yeah, no, there has been an effort to suppress it in terms of like search optimization, as far as I understand, and also just to really sanitize what it is. So like even the Wikipedia, a source that should be editable, right, just by adding more information, still takes sort of an ideological perspective on it. So yeah, but like you said, these were the dial-up days. There were like no boundaries on the internet, really. Yeah,
exactly. There were very few boundaries. And so I accessed the information, and I just kind of immediately clicked like, oh no, I am very sure this is me.
Wow.
Yeah, like it just somehow, like, it was a very sinking, awful feeling. That was a moment where I felt like, okay, this is shameful. Like, this is horrible. I can't, like, this sexuality can't be me. Like, I just was very much like in denial of, I guess what it really meant, is honestly what it was, because at that point, it was, it was very strictly confined to the sexual realm, and it didn't bleed into my daily life. I was, otherwise very outward focused. I was trying, I mean, as much as I have a rich inner world experience, which absolutely is true, I had a lot of activities because my parents really cared about raising good kids and like very socialized kids. And so I had piano, I had sports like left and right. I mean, I was just very busy and didn't have, this is not the social media age.
Yeah. Well, even when you were talking about like you're pretending or whatever, that like that's a lost art of kids being able to go out and entertain themselves. I have a couple of questions, maybe clarifying questions. The first one, when you say that you realized it was sexual, basically with the onset of puberty, I'm wondering, were the dreams like explicitly sexual in nature, or was there just obvious arousal to the mundane thoughts or preoccupation, if that makes sense? Like, was it were the and this is kind of personal, you don't really need to answer, but it's like, were the thoughts sexual in nature? Like, were sexual acts happening in your dreams, or was it just it was clear that there was an arousal response to the desire towards femininity?
It was both. It was both. Yeah. Sometimes I would be doing it with, honestly, it would be a guy or a girl. It really didn't matter. What mattered was that I was female in the dream. Yes, totally. Like that was the thing. But obviously, like in combination with just everything that was kind of going on, and you know, testosterone is like very much a hormone of go and you know, do that sort of thing. So in the dreams that would happen. But there were times too where I would just be a woman in the dream, and even that would be like, oh, that was just
exciting.
You know,
yeah. And then the second question I had, when you were looking this up and when you found the typology, were you looking up trans, or were you looking up more of the sexual aspect to it? Sorry, I'm losing my words here. But like basically like what kind of things were you typing up? Were you typing up like, why am I getting excited by these thoughts? Or were you typing up like, why do I want to be a woman so badly?
Good question.
You know, yeah, great question, Tally. If I knew, I would tell you. This is a while ago. This is over a decade ago.
That's fair.
I want to say it was probably both. I mean, I would have searched everything, truthfully, and I would have kept searching until my parents put on software that was monitoring software. But I mean, there was no shortage to acquiring information about like what I could do related to this, or like what it meant to me. I just wanted to understand. That was really what I was trying to do, is I was trying to understand myself.
But in these searches, you must have come across the concept of transition. Was that then kind of like, you know, an idea that kind of took, you know, I imagine like a pretty fierce hold of you, or was it just like, no, that's a crazy thing? Okay.
I came across it because it was a predictor. It was like, oh, you're in this bucket, so you're probably going to want to transition. And I was like, no, I'm not going to. Like,
that's for crazy people.
Yeah, right. Like my parents will disown me. I'm in this Christian bubble. I'll lose my whole life will fall apart if this happens. But if I had a crystal ball and could see like 10, 15 years, especially with the cultural changes, maybe I would have had a different outlook. But this is, again, before trans was ever, you know, even a cultural thing, really. And then much less, you know, like, I mean, gay people weren't allowed to get married at this time. Like, this is so long ago. In terms of that. And so I was not interested in transition at this time, at all.
It was a thing that other people did.
It was, I guess. I didn't know anyone that was trans. So, you know, that was another element here. So I think, Aaron, you said on a prior episode, the exposure, it creates the demand to some extent. I think that's absolutely true. But it's also like the cat's out of the bag, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally.
But at this time, there wasn't any exposure. So I was extremely like focused on the pathway my parents wanted for me, and that I honestly wanted for myself. As just, I don't know, just what would make them happy, what would make everyone in my life happy, because I'm a people pleaser. And that's something I, you know, try not to be too much, but that's just naturally how I'm like wired. Towards that.
Can I ask you, with the onset of sexuality, was it all entirely autogynephilic, or did you have like desires for actual women as a boy, or was there no competing, what we know as like competing heterosexuality?
I mean, I guess I would probably say there was like, some competing, but it's hard to decipher it, because I don't really think I don't think it was true like desire for, it was more like I wanted to date them to learn about myself. Like to understand how it would work, what would I feel like, how would they feel like. It was more of just like the romanticism of a relationship that kind of brought me into that space than it was like, I don't know. Some guys, you get the sense that they're dating to have sex, and it's like that would not have been a good descriptor for me. If that makes sense.
Were you interested in having sex with women, or with anyone really, or?
Yeah, with both, with both parties. But it was something that, I mean, because of my upbringing, it was not channeled. Like I didn't have an outlet to do that. I was very much like, I need to save this for the person that really matters. and just very like away from pornography, away from sexuality. I did end up dating in high school after I basically begged my dad to let me, because he was like, my family was very much in the courtship realm of things. So like group activities only, no one-on-one stuff. But I really wanted a girlfriend in high school to learn more about what that would be like. And I was fine with whatever boundaries they insisted on, because they did insist on a lot of boundaries. So that was fine.
Mm-hmm. So, Aaron, that was the question that I had too. And I think this is interesting for a couple of reasons. I think even people who are trying to be helpful try to prescribe heterosexuality to autosexuals. Like, if you just reroute your energy or focus your energy right on this heterosexual aspect of you, then maybe, you don't need to focus so much time on the autosexuality. But for some people, it is just like, that's the emergent sexuality. That's the stronger one. That's the one that's kind of there. And the others, or the other attractions, are kind of really deeply tied into that autosexuality. And so, I don't think that's necessarily a healthy prescription, especially because you're talking about involving another person, right? Whereas like, if these feelings come back, this becomes a much more complicated situation. But it's not, it wouldn't have necessarily been so appealing to you at that time. Although, as a teenager, maybe there would be interest in trying to conform in some way, like you said, like if wanting to take the normal path, if it were possible. But I think that's just something important to point out. Could you tell us a little bit about the emergence of your allosexuality, your attraction to women, to men, when that started, and kind of like how that was experienced?
Yeah, sure. Let me segue into that from the teen years, about when I would start having what I'd call dysphoric coping rituals. That's like what I would like now term it. At the time, I just was like, oh, I'm really unhappy with some of these anatomical changes brought on by puberty. But like I was saying, I was headstrong and I'm going to outgrow this. I'm not going to go down this path. So that didn't stop me from exploring things though. But some of these dysphoric practices, and I mentioned these in Benjamin Boyce's interview, but basically I would grab the fat of my breasts and sort of force it forward to kind of imagine what it would be like to have breasts, not in a sexual way, which is kind of actually surprising to me now. I'm like, okay, wow, that was interesting. But really to meet like an emotional need of some kind. Similar to that, I would, tuck my genitals sometimes, and I would occasionally, when I thought I could have a prolonged enough period to avoid getting caught, shave my body hair. And so those were.
Did you ever get caught?
No, okay. I never did. I did at one point bleach my body hair to like try to make it like less visible, and that did get called out one time. But I played it off, and no one really thought twice about it.
Okay.
I think it's Ray who pointed out is like a lot of male swimmers are probably autogynephilic because it's an excuse to shave all your body hair off, and I can see that, like
That's
seeking out
socially acceptable,
seeking out a sport or some kind of hobby that necessitates shaving. But
it's funny too, because I was a swimmer. I did like swimming at the YMCA, but I wasn't like serious enough as a swimmer that I felt like I would have gotten away with that, because it would have been like, really? Like it would have looked almost like an excuse. Like, you got to be really committed to the sport.
Right. So you're not a swimmer like that.
No.
Yeah.
So anyways, coping with those things, but really nothing really takes off in terms of like what your question was about, Tally, allosexuality, until I go to college and I have the freedom and the space to like actually explore without worrying about repercussions. And so, should I just keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure. Basically, so this actually ties into where I went to school. I went to a very small private Christian school all the way from 6th grade to 12th grade. I was homeschooled up until 6th grade. And so to that extent, going from 12th grade to college, almost everyone at my school, I was one of 18 to graduate. Or like my graduating class was 18 people. So like really, really tiny Christian school. Almost everybody went to Liberty. That was the Christian school Liberty. That's it's just a really popular non-denominational Christian college. That was like a pipeline for my school. There were a lot of incentives, a lot of scholarships. It was like a pipeline to go there. It was sort of expected almost. But I made a very strong point that I wanted to go to a secular college. And this ties into this because I was not very satisfied. Deep down, I was not satisfied with all the explanations I was given from the Christian perspective on how we're, why we're here, et cetera, and like all those elements. And so I wanted space to explore, particularly my sexuality, but also just to get a bigger viewpoint of the world and how things work outside of just the Christian bubble that I had been raised in. And so I went and I got into a secular school and 2 hours away from home. So not crazy far, but far enough to have the freedom to, try things out and
independence. Yeah,
exactly. Independence. And so that's what happened. And so I went to school there, and that's where I start to explore things a little bit more, not right away, but over time. One of the biggest things is that I became increasingly dissatisfied with my identity as a male, but I wasn't resolving to, I kind of did the unhealthy coping aspect of creating a double life. And that's exactly what happens in college. My life splinters into like two versions of me. And I do an insanely good job at keeping the two separate. Nobody knows this about me. They think if you just knew me, you would think I'm just your typical heterosexual male, maybe a little bit sensitive or, overly friendly or nice, maybe those things, but nothing would cue you off really, that there was something going on in me.
What was this other you?
Mm-hmm. And the other me was was exploring my sexuality. I'll just say that much. The first time this happens is when my parents we have a beach house and it's summer break and I'm at home from college, freshman year. And I go out to a gay bar downtown, completely cross-dressed. So over time, like especially during college, I had acquired more like feminine things that I could use to create a presentation that was like not by no means convincing. I'm not gonna like say like, oh yeah, I was like a super drag queen that you would never have spotted. Like, no, you would know immediately like this is a drag queen cross-dresser like person. Looks good. I mean, admittingly, I still looked good, but it wasn't like I was passing it all. And so I befriended a lot of gay guys at the clubs down in Richmond. And I would just have these experiences. I also befriended the bartender who took a unusual interest in me. And even ended up at his house one time. He was giving me a back massage. And now I look back and I'm like, okay, I know what was going on. But like naive, innocent me just was so just enamored by like all these different characters and all these different ways of living that were just so outside the norm of what I had been exposed to growing up. And I began to kind of find myself a little bit more, but I wasn't totally clicking. I wasn't like, I'm not a flamboyant gay. Like that's not me. Like, but that's who I'm around. And I'm not meeting any trans women. There's just none around. Like I met a couple drag queens, went to some drag shows, but there are no trans women. Did
you feel like you fit in with the drag queens? Did you wonder if you yourself were gay, or was it pretty clear to you that you weren't gay and rather going there was a way to cross dress? Or were you? were you thinking maybe this is going to make sense? Maybe this will make sense
Mhm.
of all of these.
Yeah, I was very much just trying to make sense. And I think it was an outlet for my expression. Like I really wanted to express my feminine side, and I really wanted to wear that frilly dress. I really wanted to, do my makeup and, I just be a part of a diverse community. And just see where the night took me. I mean, it was like adventure.
Yeah.
And I like relished these memories because it was just so immersive in a new way. And it would like kind of scratch an itch of curiosity that I couldn't otherwise scratch. And it was like this idea of what would life be like living as a woman. Even if it's this, not an accurate by any means, like this is not like what life would be like living as a woman every day, day in, day out,
Right.
but it's a taste of it. In a sort of safe way, I guess. If that makes sense. Like safe as in like people wouldn't know from my personal life about what I was doing. That was extremely important to me because I wanted to preserve all the space I could to explore and grow in confidence before I would ever tell someone. Because I would stand to potentially lose a lot reputationally, right? Like there's that whole element of the masculinity kind of, that whether that's a performance or that's truly me, I mean, it doesn't really matter. It was a version that people knew and understood and conceptualized me. And that would just completely crumble if they knew that I was out at the gay bars dressing up and hooking up with guys. And
I did
so
also want to ask, and this might be a good time to kind of to go into it, but you come across as very convincingly feminine. And I was wondering like how much of that is learned and how much of it is natural or like I think if you were this degree of feminine back then, there would be no not thinking you were gay or I think Natalie, you mentioned that was a question you wanted to ask too. Like, were you ever mistaken for gay? But I think it comes down to that. Yeah. How much is acquired femininity and how much of it is,
Wow. What a good question. Yeah. Tally, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, while you think about that, I agree with you, Schyler, that I don't think it matters that much. And this was a conversation I had with someone on Twitter the other day who was talking about, like, how can you make the distinction, right, between, like, the authentic self and the AGP desired feminine self. And where I come down on it is it doesn't matter. If it doesn't feel inauthentic, if you don't feel exhausted putting on this facade where you can't even function normally and get close to people because you're always thinking about it, then yeah, that seems like a problem. But the way that I phrased it was like, does it matter if someone's femininity or if someone's behaviors are an expression of their natural femininity or their natural desire for femininity? It's like both of these things are coming innately. I don't think it matters. That's
a very good, well put.
But I am curious with regards to Aaron's question. Yeah, like was this if we saw a video of you lined up from, your time before, would we see two very different people in mannerism and expression, not just, visually?
Yeah, you would. If it was me, it just depends on which version of me you saw. And that's how I would best describe it, because the one thing I didn't actually talk about is during these summer months, I was doing internships at various not the whole summer, but like at parts of the summer I would do these internships, and they would have me do these personality tests, and the number one trait I would consistently score on is adaptability. And it's sort of like I have this very easy way to just fluidly express femininity or masculinity to the point where it is like very much natural, but I need to lean into it, if that makes sense. I need to feel comfortable to express it. Or else I'm going to hide just based on the concerns and perceptions of what others are thinking. I will naturally hide, the femininity or the masculinity, depending on like what the environment is.
Yeah.
It also makes a lot of sense with your kind of chosen play as a child.
Good point.
It goes hand in hand there, I think. Yeah.
Right. Yes, it really does. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so, so really, this was the moment where I think the dysphoria was really building for me because, while I was very successful in presenting as a male at college, I joined a fraternity. I did all these like very male things. But I was not very happy deep down about them. And I struggled with a lot of like my inner feelings, a lot of conflict. I couldn't have necessarily put my finger on the pulse that like, oh, transition's going to fix this, because I thought like, I had all this built up in my life about, most of my friends were guys. I did have friends that were girls. But most of them, like I lived with a house of a bunch of guys. And I would like get very careful in sneaking out to the gay bars at my like college town when everyone was asleep to go like do something, and hook up with boys. And something I learned in that process was that I would hook up with guys without doing anything like feminine on myself. And it was fine. It was enjoyable, but the energy wasn't like at the top level. And then if I like played the feminine role while hooking up with them, that energy would just like go way up. And I'd be like, oh, this is like really hot. Like I really
like this is
like
what it
this.
should feel like. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll never forget, one time driving down, this was when back in my family's house over the summer, I think junior year. I was getting dressed up and I was looking forward to this. Like I would literally look forward to when I would have the house and the opportunity to go out and explore and just learn about myself and learn about others in this whole world of, gay culture and drag queens and whatnot. And I remember just crying my eyes out on the interstate, going downtown. So my family's out in the suburbs. I'm driving down to go into the city, and I was just bawling my eyes out. And the reason was just because I was so happy doing this, like in this mode of presentation, embodying this femininity, and I couldn't stand it. I like couldn't believe that I was so happy and what it would mean if I was to actually transition, and go through with living this way. And it kind of woke me up to the fact that like, there's no escaping that this is how I feel. And it was very much a pinnacle moment, even though I didn't transition for another like 2 or 3 years. It was the moment where I realized this is going to be a long road ahead in my life if I don't start to really like make some hard decisions and figure out what I need to do to avoid making mistakes, because I became obsessed with the reality that I am going to start making mistakes because my grace period is running out of the freedom to make decisions on my life. I want to move forward eventually. I'm going to want to get married. I'm going to want to move forward. And not only that, but the age you transition at as a male is very relevant to a lot of things related to passing and ease of just moving through life. And I was aware enough of myself that I had enough soft features that I would be able to really make a good transition, a convincing transition, if I was to choose this road. So now we'll just go forward a little bit, because I graduate college, nothing changes. I'm still in the whole guy kind of like phase of my life. And then I graduate and I'm single and I'm living in DC. I'm working my first job. And I meet my future partner in this state of life. And I am, at this point, I'm heavily dysphoric. I'm thinking about transition all the time. I'm thinking about what it would be like to live life as a woman, meaning like I'm perceived socially as one. Not actually a woman. Yeah.
I get why you're making that for the people watching, but yeah, Aaron and I, we don't get to talk about these things. Yes, we know what that means, and people have become really a little too uptight in these conversations to just let people express themselves. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Not literally a female. You never know what it might mean to literally be female, but yeah. At this time, were you still living a sort of double life, or had you left the kind of nights out and cross-dressing in college?
There was a little bit of double life, but it was very how would I say it? It wasn't as frequent as when I was in college, especially senior year. So I had a 5th year and my roommates graduated, and that was definitely a year where I did a lot of exploration at the local bars. There was one gay bar in particular that I'd go to a lot.
So you went from like the most you had ever cross-dressed and lived as a woman or got to present your femininity to sort of the least right after that, leaving college and now doing it much less frequently.
Right. But thinking a lot more about how happy I was doing all that. And I did do some. I don't want to say like, oh, it was just the amount was less. Yeah, even though I was like living on my own, but I moved in with some roommates not too long after living by myself, and living by myself gave me more of that freedom. Even though I was with roommates, I just didn't feel comfortable telling them all the way up until I was really getting serious with my partner. And so this kind of brings me back to that. And I told her too, I have been doing a lot of reading, a lot of research around transition, because something you all talk about that's, I feel like it needs to be said just because, but I'm completely aware that I will never actually be a female. It's not possible to change your sex. So how am I going to cope with this like gravity towards wanting to go that way? And it is like gravity. It's like, there's no escaping this. And that's what really wakes me up to, I need to make decisions in this direction of integration. And I got to stop this double life thing, because it is causing me shame. So at this point, there's definitely shame happening, because I'm like, why am I so unhappy as a male? Like, I have everything a guy could want, basically: a good job, a future ahead, great family, all these things. But I am so chronically unhappy and unsatisfied. And I'm thinking incessantly, no matter how hard I try to control my thoughts, that what would life be like as a woman? What would it be like? And it's just like, I can't satisfy this feeling, this direction. And so what happens is, I'm reading detransitioner narratives. I'm reading every critical piece of narrative I can get my hands on, because I want to find any alternatives that I can try. I want to learn about what are the regrets that detransitioners really have, because I want to avoid those. And I want to read about the trans widow narratives, because I want to know, what harm could this cause to my future partner if I am not diligent in making the right decisions? And this is where I'm really grateful that, oh my gosh, how the world has changed since I was a teenager to now at 25 years old, or 24 years old at this point. There's so many more resources. There's so much more information. This is 2017, 2018. And there's just so much more. There's lots of YouTubers. There's narratives starting to come on the scene. Okay, there weren't as many gender critical types of resources as there are now. That's right. Blossomed a lot more, but there were some. And I would find those. I would find them wherever I could, and I would be on Twitter, or I guess Twitter at the time, watching any discourse that would pop up, and just seeking anything I could to help make sense of myself and figure out how to navigate this as best as possible. The number one conclusion I reached is that I got to tell people. And so starting with my partner, or my to-be partner, and then my roommates, to just incrementally build up the confidence, because I was wildly unconfident in myself. Again, I'm not the version you see today. In terms of like, I know myself so well now that I've done all this, but at the time it seems so bad, because I'm looking at it for what it is. And I'm like, this does not look like a good life. Like, I'm going to be on hormones the rest of my life. I'm going to have these surgeries that could have complications. My lifespan could be shorter. Like, just reality out of reality, just hammering myself with this. To try to discourage myself from going this route, thinking if I end up going this route, at least I'll have the confidence that I gave myself every single barrier I, possibly could, in this direction. And so I tell my partner, about 4 months into our relationship, I have girl clothes, just to feel out how she would respond. And she responded very neutral, almost positive. And I was like, shook. Like, this did not just happen. Like, I'm like, 3 narratives of trans widow narratives in, and I'm like, this is not the rule. This is not what happens. Like, what?
Wait, you've been together how long though at this point?
4 months.
Oh, okay. You said that's okay.
Yeah. So she knew me, and we had really fallen in love right away. There was something about her. I had been with a lot of girls very short term, to try again to really understand the traits I would want in a partner and really seek that information to best make decisions. This was always a guiding kind of principle, knowing my situation. And so I told her 4 months in. I probably could have told her sooner. I mean, admittingly, there's some opinions that way, but I told her because I was like, I'm serious about you, so I need to tell you. And I did, and she responded positively overall and was like, oh, I'd like to see him sometime. But it wasn't really a big deal at all, and it didn't play a role. At no point was like the autosexuality discussion like ever. It never came up. It never mattered because it's sort of beside the point. It's like, I want to transition, and that's what is going to eventually come up. But at this point, it was more like, I need to integrate femininity in my life. And so at 10 months of our relationship, I'm going to tell her that I am gender fluid. I don't say transgender, but I say gender fluid. And I do it on the way home from a Bible study. It was like the most tense moments ever, but I was like, I have to do this. I have to do this. I was so resolute. I was like, I cannot back down. And I told her, and the way I built it up in the car just made her think I was going to tell her I was dying of cancer. And she was like relieved when I said, I think I'm gender fluid. And
do they like bark it out, like get it over with, like a Band-Aid?
Yeah, no, seriously, that was it. And this meant so much to me though, because this is the love of my life. This is the person I want to be with forever. And I'm like, she could just, this could be the beginning of the end. But it has to be done because I'm not going to have a story. I'm not going to have a trans widow story. That was my determination. And again, she responded like, with uncertainty for sure. When she got home and had more time to think about it, we talked more, and she was like, yeah, I don't know what this means, but, I support you and I love you. So I'm here, and we'll take it day by day, which is exactly what I hoped for. Cause I was like, I don't want you to lock yourself in, and I don't want you to make a decision too early either. We got to just take it step by step and just know that like, I'm going to give you all the space I can possibly give you, but I also love you. And I think you love me too. And she did. So we just kind of like took it, day by day. And well, a month later, because she responded so well, I proposed to her to ask her to marry me. Anyway, so, and then that kind of set off a whole chain of events. So I told my roommates that I told them that I'm gender fluid, but I think I'm trans. But I didn't want to prescribe myself a label. I wanted to give myself the most amount of space every step of the way so that if I didn't end up medically transitioning, let's say I could just be like a cross-dresser or perceived as gay, because this is, again, that integration of that behavioral mode. And so now I actually am getting perceived as gay, like in my normal life, which was a big shocker. And definitely something for her to get used to, because, all of a sudden people knew we were together, and now they're like, y'all just are best friends. Like,
right.
And we totally have to deal with that all the time now. I mean, no one ever thinks we're together. It's like, we are forever roommates. We laugh about it. Thank God she's very amazing when it comes to this kind of stuff. And so anyway, so proceed from there. I tell my parents that's the next really huge hurdle. And I put together like a 60-slide PowerPoint to try to explain all of the things. Y'all would be proud of me. I actually had AGP in there. So I was really thorough. but I was like, I don't think this is going to be a positive point at all. It's just going to, honestly, it just ended up, I think, confusing them because I had so many things to reference. But they thought I was self-destructing my life. They tried to put limits. I'll spare the actual story of me telling them and just kind of for the sake of time, just move forward. But they didn't take it well at all. And then that summer I proceeded to really integrate femininity pretty aggressively, but I had not started hormones. I had started seeing a therapist because I wanted to take the time with a therapist to, again, do the same thing I had been doing the whole way through. Get more information, hear what she'd have to say, plan out what it means to medically transition, connect myself to an endocrinologist. All of those things that, would otherwise help me in the long run in terms of a rational approach to making this decision.
Yeah. Which we think is really the only ethical way to go through this. Is to do it with your eyes wide open. And it's really steeped in the reality of the situation, the limitations, the potential positive outcomes, all of these things.
I completely agree. Yeah, it's the only way you can be super confident that what you made was the right decision, however many years later. Because, I mean, I'm not a fortune teller. I can't predict the future. Maybe one day I will detransition, but that day is not in sight at all for me. I'm way too happy. And,
you seem happy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You carry yourself as a very positive person. You do. It seems like, and it kind of reminds me of what you were saying before, and I can think of some trans people in my life. And again, at the risk of oversimplifying and not trying to paint too rosy a picture, because all of us here know that the reality of transition is very complicated and it's not always super rosy. But I do know people who just, their presence changed when they transitioned. Like they just seem like a more confident person, and they engage people more. Like they are just more social. They seem more confident. And like you said, could these things change at some point down the line? Sure. But it does seem to have that effect for some people. And I would imagine that's the effect it had for you.
Yes. Not right away, because I had very much a butterfly sort of effect where I was like cocooned a little bit while I'm really insecure in the process. But out comes, a much happier me, not dealing with the distress and the disruptions of these thoughts all the time. Twofold, really, because I now have an outlet, a permanent outlet for expressing my femininity and all these things, but also the hormones decrease your sex drive, which is directly fueling this, underlying distress. And so that double mechanism. So I haven't gotten to that actually in the timeline necessarily. I spend a whole year just presenting as basically a flamboyant gay guy, while engaged to Tiffany. But nail polish, feminine clothes, makeup, like everything, letting my hair grow out, doing laser hair removal, hair treatments, everywhere, because that was like the number one thing I was so dysphoric over. Body hair, facial hair.
Which seems really common.
Right. Yeah. And so I just spent that whole year doing that just to make sure that this wouldn't be like a good intermediary space for me to just hang out in. And then, and I realized like pretty far along, like I needed to go the whole way and do hormones. It was relieving, but it wasn't the whole thing. And second fold, I wanted to get married to Tiffany, and I didn't want it to be a situation of, I thought you were going to be gender fluid and not actually like a transsexual, or, trans woman. And I realized this, and I was like, all right, we got to go forward. And so I did. I started HRT, just after turning 26, after I had planned. So 25 was like, I still consider my transition starting at 25, because that was really where like I had all of that femininity coming out, and no one would have thought I was a straight male. That would have shook people. And honestly, I've always thought of myself as bisexual, just through and through when it comes to the outward orientations.
I think on a recent
so-
episode, we just said virtually all autosexuals
Or
virtually all
bisexual.
heterosexuals are basically bisexual.
Yeah.
Obviously there's obviously not all, but it just seems to be pretty constant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just elaborate for a second. We basically feel like this concept of metasexuality, which is like attraction to others that is related to autosexuality, feels like it's present even in the trans people who are opposite sex attracted only. And so like we have a friend, right, who's a trans woman who is attracted to women exclusively, but she wants a woman who's taller than her.
Right. They always have to be a woman more masculine.
Right, exactly. So it's like even there is this like bisexual, for lack of a better term, aspect that's inherent in it seems like in at least auto heterosexuality. So that makes sense to me. And yeah, that's one of like the sticking points of the navel gaze, and our purpose here is to like really illuminate what was previously called pseudo bisexuality, because it doesn't feel like that accurately describes a lot of people. I can't say most, we're not working with data here, but like from most trans women that I encounter and self-aware autogynephiles and people who like you, Schyler, are really not interested in retconning. I mean, I don't think most people do it intentionally, but people like you who try to do everything in their power to make sure that they're not like rosying up their picture for sake of consistency, who find themselves like really sincerely and surprisingly attracted to men. And so I do think this is like a real, again, because it's sexuality. Like all of these things are so interrelated. And that's something, I'll stop talking in a second, but I appreciate your description, and I think you're going to elaborate a little more on HRT in that process, but I appreciate your description of the relief that you had from HRT being tied into the suppression of testosterone. And because this is linked to sexuality, and the dysphoria is even being sort of produced or pushed through from this sexuality. Whereas a lot of people tend to favor this like intersex brain explanation, right? Which is like my brain doesn't function without estrogen. And that's why HRT works for me, as opposed to it's decreasing my testosterone. It's making some of these feelings more manageable. Also, when my testosterone is decreased, I feel less manly, and therefore it's easier to feel like a woman. Like there are all these very rational, logical explanations for why someone would sincerely feel better and maybe even feel healthier, like feel like they can live in their life more and be more active. That doesn't mean that your brain has some estrogen deficiency or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Oh, totally. Yeah. I just really believe in, the most like grounded explanation, for making sense of how these effects work. Of course there's layers to it. So it's tempting to pull into those more palatable or politically correct or convenient narratives. And I don't really fault trans women or trans men or anyone that's trans that does this, because I think it's sort of what I would expect, if that makes sense. It's just how people live. I mean, even whether you're trans or not, a lot of people will do things like this. And so it's like, but I think to help other people, that's why I'm online. So we actually didn't get to that, because that comes way later. But it has to do with the fact that I'm done with the gender ideology narrative, and I want to see people really understand that not only can transition help, but there's options within. You don't have to fully transition. You can, I do think that there's ways to navigate alternatives. But to say also that, transition can work, and it can be a rational decision for some really dysphoric people that have tried the other options. And it does come at a cost. That's for sure. But anyways, back to the story, I guess. I know we're over an hour, so I'm going to try to keep it moving.
You're doing great. Don't worry too much. But yeah, keep going. And then I would like you to elaborate on what some of those costs are, or what they've been for you personally, or what you see as some of the costs that trans people have to pay, basically. But continue where you left off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, HRT. So okay, but before I do HRT, as part of my therapy, I do want to call this out because this is super relevant for my stage of life now. But I did sperm banking for double what my urologist recommended. And because having kids were so important to me, that I planned that out as part of my transition. And I strongly think that that should be something that almost every trans person should do. I've talked to so many trans women that regret not doing it. Not to mention all the stories online, but of course it's a personal decision. But it is one reason why I do think it's best to wait to transition, so you can do that to help set up your life right. But okay, so HRT, going through the changes, and again, I'm still in this limbo state with my partner because she's with me. We're engaged, but we have not set a wedding date. Now, in talking with her recently, she actually made the decision to stay with me before I guess I had started HRT, but I wanted the assurance after starting HRT that those physiological changes wouldn't be a barrier to us like connecting intimately, because that was really where my fears went. Personality wise, we didn't have any problems. Like we were besties from day one when we met each other. And that's what sort of made all this matter and so meaningful in staying together and navigating this carefully. But I wanted to make sure that the intimate situation was okay, because she was always conceptualized herself as heterosexual into men. And this was very new territory for her. But me and my little sexology research, I knew that autosexuality is able to stretch and bend and, it can. I'm not saying it will, and you shouldn't count on that, but you should give it a chance. You should think about that. And so that's exactly what happened for us.
That's great.
Yeah, she was more, our relationship was always more founded on less gendered aspects and more about our mutuality and our personalities. And I think that was part of what helped carry us through this. Even though I was changing physically, my personality really wasn't. And like you all had said, there were parts of my personality that were really coming through, and I was able to be more present because I was less, psychologically distant. Even especially when it came to intimacy, because something I didn't talk about was how I always had to kind of imagine myself as female to engage intimately. But this barrier was sort of breaking down as I was transitioning. And so it actually caused me to be more connected to the moment.
Present.
Yeah. And she noticed it.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. And that's something that we talked about again early on this show, was like, it feels like almost some diagnostic criteria that's missing, and trying to get at like, what is the source or the ideology of these trans feelings, is how are you picturing yourself when you're having sex? And that was something when I found out from my wife that she pictures herself as a man, it was shocking to me. This is what Aaron and I were trying to kind of like, we were joking that I had like the only true HSTS female partner. And then it was like, oh, she has this like critical aspect that is central to her sexuality, which even makes it sound more important than it is, but rather like it's necessary. Like you said, it was like, in order to be present, in order to experience the positive benefits of sexuality and sexual expression, you needed to see yourself that way. And then of course the genderists will say, well, that's just proof that you are a woman, because women also picture themselves as women when they're having sex. But really it does seem like this sort of if it's persistent from throughout this person's life, it seems like a pretty incredible detail and insight into where these feelings come from, or at least that they're very intimately related to sexuality.
I completely agree. Yes. I think there's I think it's hard to talk about, and I think a lot of people may not even be aware always what's going on up there. But I don't know. I'm very analytically wired, and I just always am kind of wanting to know. Like, I'm always interested in observing those types of things, and have just tried to really figure out, why did transition work so well for me? What distinguishes someone in my situation versus someone who, I guess, maybe hit more stumbling blocks or went down the wrong road in a decision, or, any of those things. And so, anyways, I don't want to ramble on that. Again, time, focusing on, where are we now? Oh yeah. So our relationship survives through it. COVID hits. So that's kind of where now we're finally getting to COVID. Before COVID, I take a new job. Within starting HRT, we began passing within like 2 months, which is incredibly fast for most MTF transitioners. It usually takes a year or two, and they're talking about like that long and painful period. But I had already been doing hair removal treatments. I had already kind of fashioned my fashion sense, for lack of better words. I figured that out, and I was already a jump start on makeup. So I was already like well in, because of all that social transition period. I was illuminated, or just really happy through it. And I'll never forget when it was like, so I started HRT in January, and by, I think it was like April or May, I started having people give me double takes when I'd go into the men's restroom. So I was just using the men's restroom all the way through this. And I'm going to bring this up because the whole Nancy Mace thing is kind of like fresh.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
We can totally talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just say, like, I said this on Benjamin Boyce's his conversations. But I've been using the men's room until I was in the bathroom, and there was a security guard, and he was at the urinal, and he did a double take of me, like through the mirrors that were like able to like see me by the things. And he was like, "Hun, you're in the men's bathroom, right?" And it wasn't super threatening, but it was a big enough signal to be like, I think it's time to kind of choose the gender neutral or go to the women's, to like be as incognito as I can be. Because that's what I'm really after. I don't want to invade anyone. I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but it's starting to affect some of these guys. I don't think he would have hurt me, but he is much, much bigger than me. And it just, it just became, at the time too, it was very progressive. This is like, again, 2018. So it just seemed like a good idea to change bathrooms. And so I did. And I kid you not, like a week later, I was going through security, and there was an older lady, and she saw my badge, and she pulled me aside and said, "Hon, this won't do." And she forced me, or not forced, but she very strongly walked me to the security section and was like, "You're getting a new picture," to like update for my presentation.
Right.
And so there's just a lot of cultural pressure in that time to use the, women's restrooms. So, but from there on, I just would use the women's, and I never once had a double take or anything with the women's bathrooms, which really took me by surprise, because I did not think I always just was more critical of myself and didn't really think I was passing. I still sometimes am like, I'm not really passing. But no, the signs from other people seem to indicate differently.
Yeah, you do seem
How tall are you?
Unusually cued into other people's perceptions as well. But yeah.
Yeah. And I really put that to the test at GenSpec. But anyways, going back to this time period. So that happens.
No. You totally passed that test, because I remember Stella saying in some interview after that, it was basically saying there was a
trans woman there that no one knew. I was just about to say.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, was there?" Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were there, and I had no idea. So yeah.
In hindsight, I don't know if that was like insensitive, and I kind of like, I don't know. I have mixed feelings, but I really wanted to know that I guess I passed, and I really didn't think that it was that crazy. But that's all because of where I had been before in my situation, and like more of a progressive space, never having an issue. And now it's like seeing it was really what happened to Phil that opened my eyes to, gosh, I was like a step away from this.
Well, it's like, thank God you didn't say anything, because look what happened to Phil at that conference.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I do wonder what kind of pressures that would have put on you had you been outed, for lack of better terms. Like, I mean,
Well,
I guess
it's
there were
funny.
other
I
trans
was
women
out at
there.
yeah, I told people I was a
Right.
trans woman openly at the conference.
Right.
Gen Spect had put on their website that they're not a transphobic organization. And to me, that meant, okay, bathrooms, they're not going to like, get super upset. But what I didn't really think about is who's attending the said conference. And that was really ignorant of me in hindsight. And I realize this now, but
listen, the bathrooms thing, it's complicated. It's like not I don't really see perfect solutions, frankly. Yeah, I mean, like it's good that you're thinking about it and being conscious, and it does sort of feel like, on the one hand, like saying, oh, third spaces, that's not a complete enough answer, even just for the fact that like what it would cost to like re-outfit the entire country with third spaces everywhere, and then like, what are you going to penalize businesses that can't afford to like, gender neutralify their spaces? And so I think there are a lot of problems there, but it does seem like that is sort of like a good option, is like whenever possible for people who whether they're concerned they're going to make people uncomfortable or not really. It's interesting because even like the experience that you said having in the bathroom, it's really interesting. Like when you told the story to me, I'm like, oh, that's like a non-threatening guy. Like I'm imagining, because I can imagine myself, I'm a woman that's gone in the men's restroom before, if there's a line, if there's like whatever reason, right? And so to me, I'm thinking like someone says like, this is the men's room, hun. That to me is like non-threatening. And I see why though that would carry a different valence for you, even though I still think like you agreed, this guy probably wasn't trying to beat you up or anything. But for me,
no.
I'm not hiding anything when I get seen in the bathroom, right? And so like I actually can understand. I don't want to say for the first time, but I do feel like I had a slight epiphany just listening to this, because again, I hear that and I'm like, that's not threatening what this guy said, and I still don't think he would have tried to hurt you. But when I'm in that situation, I'm not carrying around the added layer that like that there's something more. I'm not afraid of being found out when this happens, like.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah. No, it does. It makes sense. Yeah. And I think for me, it was just this, it wasn't so much I in the moment I was like, I had a disproportionate reaction of fear. I will, in hindsight, totally own that and be like, yeah, I didn't need to be afraid. That afraid. Cause like you said, he's not going to hurt me. Like that's crazy. Right. He's a security guard. He'd lose his job. Like this is ridiculous to think. Yeah. And I see it for what it is. And this is, and I would just say is like, I made a lot of mistakes. Like I'm not a perfect person. I leaned into scripts. My biggest mistake is that I put pressure on my family to use she, her pronouns for me. I wish I had never done that. That was stupid. And I still make mistakes today. Like I'm a human. You got to give yourself grace, for those mistakes, and just think about what you can do better the next time.
Well, and it's just like, if we want to get anywhere, we need to allow people to change their minds and change their actions. Yeah. So like, I'm with you. I mean, I was a crazy TRA. Like I was a very intense left-wing activist for a long time. So yeah, we have to give people the space and the grace to change their mind and to act accordingly. I'm like for some reason I'm like averse to you criticizing yourself in this way. Like, did you make mistakes going it? Like, sure, I guess. Like, was anyone harmed? Like, I don't know, and the bathrooms I think are a tricky situation because I don't really feel like it's that much of a problem for trans people who care about integrating, right? I know like the problem is self-ID in many ways. But I just do feel like we've gotten to a point where like the arguments that the women have who want sex segregation, they're highly defensible. Like they are good arguments, they are rational arguments and reasonable arguments. And so I do think like maybe we'll have to take this sort of backlash. And now let me just ADHD for 1 second. This backlash reminds me of something that you said earlier, which is just like the like love and just like space to express yourself that you found in the gay bars. I'm like feeling emotional. I don't even know why, but it makes me sad. There's so much beauty in like drag to me personally. I know not everyone likes it. Why am I crying? This is so ridiculous. Yeah, I think there is something super liberating about like when you're in that space and you can dance however you want and you can wear whatever you want and people don't care and people love it. You know, it's like the thing with trans is like the problem is trying to force it on everyone, but there are plenty of people who are gonna love it, who are into that, who are drawn to that. And so yeah, I care socially and culturally about like rights and stuff changing, I guess, but it just makes like there is a lot of beauty and liberation in quote unquote queer spaces and lifestyle. And yeah, I don't know. It's just sad that like none of us want to be associated with that anymore for good reason. But yeah, it's like even like with the drag queen story hour stuff, like, do I think it's ridiculous and unnecessary? And I think it's literally just virtue signaling. I think that's unnecessary. I don't think these drag queens want to hurt these kids. Like they're I think overwhelmingly they like children, whatever. They want to show acceptance. They want to. A lot of drag queens, their characters are extremely wholesome, and then it gets into like, what is their crime? Impersonating the opposite sex. I don't see that as a crime. Yeah, sorry for that real tangent, but
no, it's okay. Yeah, I find that so interesting. It's like I think they, I don't really know what to make of the drag queen story hour. To be perfectly honest with you,
yeah.
It's not a good look no matter what.
It's a terrible look. And then you see the ones and they're wearing the really sexy outfits and they're not wearing, the Mrs. Doubtfire costume. And so it's like, which is why I think it's really virtue signaling. Like, I think it's just it's just terrible. It's terrible optics and it's unnecessary. But like, I don't think most drag queens are groomers.
Yeah.
Like by any stretch of the imagination. So
I think you hit the nail on the head with the virtue signaling. I think so much of it is the self-righteousness about instilling this culture, this idea, like this ideal of gender fuckery and whatnot.
Right. We have the right views and the right morals.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And teaching the children this is so important and so good. And I think the gender criticals are right to oppose it, but they're opposing it for all the wrong reasons. It's like, by saying, oh, these people are like sexual groomers is like, I really, really don't think that's what's going on there, but they are grooming in the looser sense of the world is projecting an ideology and trying to, it's a propaganda, I would say, is a more accurate way to put it. But yeah, so I think it's completely ridiculous and over the top and unnecessary. But yes, do I think that this is some sort of conniving effort to sexually abuse children? No.
Right.
And they're making jokes of themselves by insisting that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure. Okay. Yeah. So the bathrooms, start a new job, and then really the last really big thing, I guess I would say, is part of my story. I've been going on and on about this story, so I'll just try to end it up and then pivot to why I'm online talking to you all today. And that is really just so I decide that I want to. So my partner and I are going to get married. We know this, and COVID has come, and I realized that I really want to get facial feminization surgery as like the most meaningful surgery in helping my makeup look better. Just like the way, like, to show I had really hooded eyes, but I had like a prominent brow ridge. So I wanted to get that taken care of, and my hairline was a little bit back, so I wanted to get that taken care of. But one of the big things I wanted to do in my process for going to surgery was not get carried away from trying to create this like very beautiful image. I just wanted to get rid of the masculinized aspects. And I really think this is worth saying something, because a lot of the critical discourse I see around this is, oh, it's just body hatred. It's just hatred of your body, but it's specifically hatred of the sex characteristics you perceive of the sex you don't want to be. So to say it's just this broad stroke of body hatred is missing the point. It just really is. Yeah. And so, anyway,
you're like,
so
you have to hate yourself in order to transition. It's like, no, you have to basically feel alienated from this specific part of yourself. It's a very, very different thing. And just again, missing the mark by painting motives as counter to what they are.
Yeah. Well, and it's like the people who try to relate it to body dysmorphia. It's like, no, this is people accurately assessing what they look like and feeling discomfort from correctly assessing their sex characteristics and having an issue with that, as opposed to dysmorphia, which is like incorrectly perceiving yourself, like seeing a fat person where there is a skinny person, whereas like, no, that's not what's happening when people have sex dysphoria. They're not like seeing some caricatured version. They're
seeing the reality of their sex.
They're seeing the reality, right? And it's the reality that is so distressing for them.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. And to that point, Tally, I'm really glad you pull that out, because that was exactly why I wanted my surgeon's opinions on the specific things I was seeing. Because I was like, is this what you see too, or am I getting like, for lack of better terms, the goggles or whatever, or you see wrong, the things distorted or whatever. It's like, I just didn't want to see anything distorted here. But the surgeon I went to, was his specialty was preserving the integrity of your existing features. So it worked extremely well. Going to the surgeon, he was very happy for me as a patient. He said I had a great starting point, and that he would be happy to take care of those key targeted things, tracheal shave, brow ridge, and hairline. And that was what I went in for. No jaw work, no rhinoplasty. I didn't want to go overboard. I just wanted to hit the main things. And so that's what happened. And I healed up from that. We got married. During that time, Tiffany staying with me, I think, indicated to my parents, who were really struggling on whether to come to our wedding, that they might just be making the wrong decision if they don't come. And they chose to come to the wedding. And so they were there for it. And so were my brothers and several of my extended family. And it was a beautiful wedding. It was everything I could have hoped for. And then shortly thereafter, we moved actually to nearby my parents. Now we live like 10 minutes away. And now several years from that, we've been trying to have kids. And going through an IVF journey. I talk about it a little bit on my channel. It's definitely more difficult. And Tiffany has more feelings about this when it comes to my transition and realizing we weren't just going to conceive a conventional manner. So that I think that's kind of interesting to hear from her perspective. I always want to give her the ability to say how she feels. I think there's a lot of value and insights in there. And then finally, to close the loop on why I'm on the podcast today. It comes from the fact that we were successful for a short window of time. She was pregnant for about a month to 2 months. And before we got the horrible news that it was a miscarriage. And but in that time, I had like a lot of transformations of heart in terms of like how I'm living my life and if I'm being intentional. Oh, sorry. Still gets me. Anyways, just am I using my time wisely? And I think my Christian background really influenced this in me. And conservative background, but especially that I felt like I have things I should say. And I should add my voice. And I had just been spending those years enjoying my transition, living, anonymously, quietly, peacefully, seamlessly, passing. I was not thinking about my gender. This was like everything that a successful transition meant to me, just living life. Of course, I am taking HRT, and that is always something you have to do when you're trans. And so that is back to that thing about costs of transition. That's kind of one of them, is that you're always sort of tethered to the church of perpetual hormones, or whatever you want to call it, if you want to be really antagonistic on it. But when it is like your medication, it is like, that's just how it is. I mean, to me, it's like the same as a diabetic taking insulin. That's how it feels to me, just for a mental condition. And so, but in that phase of life, even though it was a miscarriage, I resolved to put myself out there. And something Benjamin Boyce had posed to me at the GenSpec conference when I was talking to him at the bar was, what if life is one big test? And this philosophical question I couldn't get it out of my head since that conference. And it got me motivated to say, all right, yeah, you're right. Like, so what if people, what if I get called AGP? So what? Like, at the end of the day, I would much rather help people navigate and avoid bad decisions. And there's so much noise in the gender space in particular that, I'm not an expert. I don't know everything, but I know what I know from my own life. And it's just another lived experience, but it's one that I think comes through and helps other people. And if it can just help one person, I'm happy with that. And it already has happened since I came out on the Benjamin Boyce channel, and have thereafter tried to get involved in various projects. It's definitely a learning curve. I am by no means good at the online space, really. I'm learning so much, and I still have issues with fear of posting things, and just it's difficult, but it's important to me to help other people. And so that's why I'm here on your podcast, because you all started these hard conversations. And I think that people just need to know. They just need to know. And again, someone's going to see this and be like, oh, okay, and make sense of something. And that I would have loved that for me back 10 years ago. Yeah, that's okay. That's it. That's the bow. I'm putting it there.
Thank you so much. We're glad that you are here sharing your story. I think what I hope is, I kind of hope some parents will see your story and maybe watch this conversation. That's kind of on my mind lately. I think there are parents with the ROGD/AGP sons who are really concerned. And a lot of them, especially if they're in this space, their goal or desired outcome would be for their kid not to transition. And I think that's fair, and something that all three of us sort of share is like, the best outcome is someone reconciling their sex, not being miserable and forcing to, slough through it, but being able to be comfortable and live. But I think it's good to know too that there's a possible end game where transition still happens, but the person doesn't lose tether from reality, right? It doesn't need to come with dogma. It doesn't need to come with ideology. It can be a very sober, rational choice, and a successful one. Like, yeah, you have a successful transition and a successful life from what it seems. And so I do hope there are people who can, even if it wouldn't be their desired outcome for their kid, that they can see that this is not so bad. In fact, I'd say it's a pretty beautiful life that you have. And so I do hope that can bring people a little comfort, because it's scary for a lot of these parents who are walking like a tightrope right now, trying to just even maintain a relationship with their kid. And they're so afraid of their kid turning into a TRA or an obnoxious, they don't want their kid to be Leah Thomas, like so for a lot of them, like, because there are parents who don't want to acknowledge that it's AGP, right? And then there are others who are like maybe open to that, but they don't want their kid to be a trans activist, right? Like to be this person who's paranoid and requiring affirmation from society in order to live, you know? So I think your story is one of hope and a very positive one.
Agreed.
What, do you have anything? Yeah, Aaron. Yeah.
No, I couldn't follow that. She totally covered it perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Schyler.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. It's never hopeless. The important thing for those parents is just to keep the relationship, and much like any child, do the same things that would prepare them for success. You know, get them get them off the internet. That's like the biggest one in the real world. And just, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but just the same things that made your childhood great are the same things that will work today. So,
yeah. And the only thing I would add actually is there's the concern about following the TRA pipeline, but then there's also, I think parents need to not fall into the trap of the GC pipeline where they're trying to insist that their children are gay or lesbian when they very much aren't. It's like this like, why can't you just be this thing or be this thing? Like they're trying to force something on their kids that is not natural to them. That's not actually who they are. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like you don't have to be this gender abolitionist, as it turns out, like homosexual celebrator or whatever's going on with the GC movement right now, or the TRAs. It's like there can be something in the middle where you can be like, you know, this is reality. It's okay. You know, like, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, that's the path that we're trying to forge for sure. And not just Aaron and I, but Phil and Ray and other people. Just there are other options out here, and those options are also not just repressing, right? Like there are other ways to try to navigate these feelings in a healthier and less like socially abrasive way.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, there definitely is, and that conversation really needs to be had, and that is not something you would have ever seen even 5 years ago. I feel like I didn't see that. I saw it on little fringe corners of the internet, but now I'm starting to see it more and more come centerfold. But again, the problem is just the layers of everything it means to transition and how obfuscating that ends up being for so many different people that see like one aspect, and then they take that and they make that the whole story. And to some extent, I almost feel like I could be guilty of that with autosexuality and speaking to it so much as a sexual orientation, when that is true to my experience. But how much is that the same for other people, where maybe this emerges later in life, or they, there's just so many layers, and people are so unique. And I feel like this is the crux of the problem for GenSpect, really, at the end of the day, is that these layers make it difficult for them to come in and say, oh, this is useful framing. When, I mean, I'm partial to it being useful, but there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of variation. And so there's so many, it's like paths are unique, but I do think autosexuality puts you in a position, puts you in the arena where transition could be a rational way to handle it, but you should hold, hold that in resistance almost. Don't go into it without testing all the other options as much as possible, because you lose your fertility. This is the cost of transition. We're going back to this now. You lose your fertility. It uproots many of your relationships. Anything that's super anchored in your original biological sex that was a friendship with is going to be really tested, uncomfortably so. And you can't control how everyone reacts. So you always have to keep that in mind. You could lose people, loved ones, that won't want to associate with you. And you'll always feel a little bit different and possibly misunderstood by a lot of people.
You'll always be a foreigner, essentially.
Yes.
If anyone has an experience of living kind of in another country than of their birth, I think that's the kind of chronic state of the trying to stealth or whatever transsexual is. That you'll always feel a little bit like a foreigner as well.
Yeah.
Well,
that's so well said, Aaron. Yeah.
Yeah. For what it's worth, that's something that I can relate to also. It's just always feeling like, and I guess this has to do with this sort of like intangible inward turn that we all kind of talk about with this autosexual experience. But yeah, that resonates with me. Just feeling like not exactly like everyone else, basically. Misunderstood, I guess, for lack of better terms. So you guys are not necessarily alone in that feeling either, but I think that's a good way to describe it.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not unique to being trans. Other people can experience it too, but it's a surefire effect to happen from being trans. For sure. And then there's the reality that you could one day realize, I want to go back. And I often think about this, but when it comes to my children, sometimes if I'm able to have children, that I don't know what the future holds. And I always keep that in mind. When it comes to my transition, it's like, no matter what though, if I was to ever detransition, this was absolutely needed for me to get me where I am in life. Like, as much as some people will harp on it's part of your gender journey, it honestly feels like that for me. Like it was necessary in my gender journey, no matter where I end up. I needed to do this to get through the day and really eliminate the disruptions that were otherwise plaguing me and really just stealing and robbing me of my joy of living life. And it's like now that that's behind me, I don't know. I'm just so happy. And it's like, that's how I found out that I would be happy, is by challenging all of that and not running full embrace into transition.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that brings me to one more thing. I know we're like, we keep trying to wrap it up here. I can tell just the tone and all of our voices, but this reminds me of one more thing that I want to talk about. So we did a reaction video to the Dollcast episode that you guys had with Colin Wright. And noteworthy part of that conversation is Taff. Is that how you say her name?
Yeah, Taff. Yeah.
Taff. Taff basically says, like, she sees sort of like an alternate universe where she could have lived her life as like a man with AGP. And she says, like, if I could transfer knowledge, like from one time plane to another, and could tell my curious pre-transition self, if I knew what it was going to feel like to be on the other side of it, I think I'd be able to get through without doing it. And so I hear that as maybe part of what you're saying is like, like you needed to do it almost so you would know, because as Taff said too, like she knows that if she didn't do it, there would always be this itch and this fear of like, am I just missing out on living my life fully? Is life going to be better if I did this thing? I do wonder though, and this just occurred to me now when you were saying it, how much of that has to do with the fact that she transitioned as a teenager and didn't do any of that,
right,
of that pushback. And I'm sure as a teenager, a month of doing that pushback feels like forever, right? Like, because everything is so intense and you feel like you're the first person ever to experience these things. But I do wonder how much that plays into it. If like you actually, you really lived your life trying not to lean into that, or you felt out what it was going to be like, and so maybe you really can be more confident in your transition. Like you said, you never know what's going to happen down the road, but I would have to imagine that helped you feel secure in where you are right now. And it was, I think, really illuminating to see someone like Taff who passes, right? And it's like, by all intents and purposes, a success, had a successful transition. But now she has to wonder, like, what would my life
could I have
been as a man? Yeah.
Right, because she never experienced it. Yep.
Yeah. So Yeah, and I think that was that conversation ended up being, I think, really beneficial, because there was, you had your experience of someone who still chose to transition as an adult, but really let yourself go through young adulthood and adulthood, and then you had the two of them who are happy with their lives, but are never gonna the what if is actually taken away when you transition as a child. It's like I'll always yearn for the transition, if I don't do it, but you actually foreclose the opportunity to be an adult man, to be a young man when you transition young.
Right. Yeah, you never really know what that would be like because you never get there. And to that extent, there is an assurance that I have about my decision that just can't be replaced, or can't be. I just, like you said, this is actually sort of a big part of what I've been thinking about the child transition situation, because I really, theoretically, I want to believe that for autosexual, dysphoric individuals, that makes, it can make sense. It can make sense. But I always come, there's these, it's like a pendulum. It's like, it swings right back to, well, what about psychological fragility and knowing that this is really right for you? And it's like, I am so torn on is there enough, do you really know yourself? This question just always comes back, and it's it's hard for me to really opine on it well, because I am lucky enough to still pass at 25 transitioning. That is just wild for so many biological males to have that take place. And yeah, I had some surgery, but nothing compared to what many will go to lengths to do and still yet be perceived in moments where I literally, it never comes up. I had this question on my stream, has anyone clocked you? And I'm thinking through, and I'm looking at Tiffany, and she's like, no. And I'm yeah, no, literally this never comes up, unless I'm in an environment that people knew me before. And that happens quite frequently, but it's not that often.
Right.
And so it's difficult for me because I don't have the trade-off of the time where masculinization might be irreversible. But it is something to be said that you are absolutely right, that there's a confidence and an assurance that comes from waiting and trying all the alternatives, which is why I have literally no regret when it comes to the medicalization of my journey. My regret is in just dealing with social elements around my transition, and missteps is really what I would call them. They're just missteps that I can correct and come back from and learn from. Medicalization, you may not be able to. And so, it's absolutely an interesting thing. And that's where Dollcast has been really interesting for me, just to try to be in this pseudo activist environment almost. It's fascinating. And y'all are really hard on Bree. I'm just going to say that.
Say it.
Because I really appreciate her for giving Taff and I this space to be on her podcast. And I myself struggle to frame my words and speak up and do that. But I trust that with time, if we stick with this, I think maybe there could be a opening of a space for people who identify with more of an autosexual orientation. Because for just, there's really no way to put it, but the AGP framing is not, I talked about this, we'll come out with Phil, but I can't see it ever going mainstream as an adopted, oh yeah, this is me, this is my identity. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe time will, happily, show that I'm wrong here, but I don't see it. And I think the closest fit is going to be an autosexual type of experience where you're talking about the patterns of emotionality that flow from what is ultimately, I guess, a miswired sexual orientation, inwardly focused. But it alludes more in the terminology to what's really going on as a sexuality and not as a paraphilia, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm completely with you. I think by talking about it as a paraphilia, It both, and again, this is a disagreement Phil and I have because he's very scientific about the language, but I'm like, first of all, it's not something that people identify with having, and also it alienates people who don't experience the specific paraphilia you're describing. I think it's lose-lose, and I don't want to say I'm not saying this because it's not like I want to come up with like a better propaganda way of saying this. Not at all. I'm saying it doesn't sound right to the people who experience it mostly, and it isn't really tasteful to people who are you're trying to get to understand you in an empathetic way. So it's just I don't see the effectiveness of the. I personally don't like the term autogynephilia. I don't have a personal relationship with it because that's not my experience, but in general, without the gender critical obnoxiousness around it, I think it's quite beautiful. Love of oneself as a woman. I mean, that, like what's bad about that framing? But like when it comes to just how it's been, go on, Tali.
Well, no, it works if you have like any basic understanding, or if you're coming from a sexological framework, because it's like none of these parts of the word are stigmatizing, right? There are sexualities that are auto, right, that are turned inward. There are sexualities that are gynephilic or androphilic, right, or bisexual, right? There are sexualities that are gynandromorphophilic, right, that are specifically most aroused by sort of a morph of the two sexes or the two bodies. And so I agree. Like when you put it in that context, that's the thing. Like people will be like, "Oh, the philia, right? It's like paraphilia." It's like, well, gynephilia is straight male sexuality, right? And that we don't see that as stigmatizing. And I don't think auto is the word that's stigmatizing it there, right? It's not like adding auto on the front. Gynephilia is what's people out. So people aren't used to using those terms, and so I'm with you. And I think Aaron and I both are. Like we like the auto heterosexual framing of it. We talk. Our podcast is a podcast about autosexuality. We're comfortable with that framing. We think it better describes the subjective experience and how it really like functions within people. But then, of course, it's just so interesting how many barriers people like us three are up against trying to promote this message, because the gender criticals don't want us changing the word. They don't want it to be anything less stigmatizing. They want all the stigma that you can possibly attach to it.
Which is so counterproductive to their aims.
It is. It is so counterproductive. You're right. No, and that's become very frustrating for me, and I know you too, Aaron. But yeah, like, so there are some people then who push back, like sexuality. It's not a sexuality, It's a lot of homosexuals who get very righteous about this, like, don't come on my beautiful, precious sexuality. Don't bring your dirty perversion over here. But I'm with you. I think that is a better framing. And I've had conversations, even in the last several months, with trans women online who were pretty against the typology. And then we've gotten to talking more. I think people are like slightly disturbed by the way that I speak about autogynephilia, like trans people who are not like, in the gender critical space. But then I think then it becomes clear that I don't hate them at all. Like at all. If anything, I feel an affinity in some way, to trans people and I guess, specifically to autogynephiles. But I've had a few conversations with people who basically get around to like, okay, this typology thing is real. But like you're saying, Schyler, but the term is just so, and they make a good point. What's the point of the term if it alienates the people who have the experience, if they're never going to want to use it because it is so stigmatizing, and who does that help? And, that's where I get back to like the importance of the term is not so much wearing a label as it is helping people to understand their experience in a way that is is tangible and rooted in reality and not some ineffable gendered soul, right? Or intersex brain or something that like the people who believe that, like, it's like they believe that up until it's like, okay, so you want to test your brain, like let's do the brain scan here then, right?
Yeah.
No one wants to go down that road. But yeah, I mean, and I think that's part of why, just to comment on the Brie thing too. I mean, we are hard on her. I go pretty hard on her. Part of it is probably like she like blocked me a while ago, so I have a little bit of it out for her in that. But the frustration that I feel is I feel like she disparages autogynephiles. I feel like her political project. I said it in our last episode, and maybe it's not fair, but I said that I feel like she would throw you under the bus if it meant sort of reserving her space. And I know this is a little awkward because you guys are co-hosts and stuff, and I appreciate you coming on to defend her. And frankly, we would love to have her on. I'd love to come on Dollcast. I think it's probably time for female, someone. And again, I'm just like, I don't hate trans people. I think it'd be a pretty good person to come on. But after pitching myself to someone who I've talked a lot of shit about, I understand why she wouldn't want to have me on. But like I said, she made a comment on Twitter the other day, like someone was talking about like no penises in the women's room, right? And it's just like, so you and Taff just like fuck off. You guys need to go use the men's room, like, and I think there's problems incentivizing bottom surgery, which is like a really intensive procedure. And I don't think that having surgery should get you entry into a space. And so really my frustrations with her about what I feel is, I guess I feel it's lying too, because I've been told by other people that she really does understand the typology and has a more compassionate perspective. And then, sorry, I'm rambling here, but I also understand why she doesn't talk about it. If she really does have a better understanding that she portrays, I understand why you don't lead with that. It is stigmatizing. And she already faces a lot of pushback from trans people, and that's one way to like really get even more pushback. But I think that's what frustrates me is like she really tries to draw these clean lines between transsexuals and like crossies. I mean, she was calling a trans woman friend of Aaron and I, like calling her like an autistic crossie. Like it was just like nasty stuff that I see as natural, I guess, human defense mechanisms. Like all of these things are true, but that's where my frustration with her really comes.
I understand. Yeah, I get it. I mean, it's tough because there is a huge propensity for especially passing trans women or trans women who have gone the full medical route and are otherwise like very palatable to society in presenting a feminine essence, like that's sort of what people's natural instincts are for me. And even if I tell them autosexual is part of my story, they won't even know what to think. They'll go, oh, you're just like, a closet, internalized homophobia. That's the one that came up like so much in the Benjamin Boyce interview. And I'm like, gosh, and it's just, no, well, okay, that's what you took from it. I'm not out to force opinions,
right?
But she is part of a political project to save, rights for trans people as best as possible. And that's not my role necessarily. I mean, I agree with it overall. I think most of us are not malevolent actors, but there is a problem with overt displays of sexualized behavior making women uncomfortable. Like this is an effect, and she's trying to situate that, and like I was saying, no one's perfect, and I am in agreement with the standpoint of that we shouldn't be encouraging people that it's a sexual thrill to do this kind of behavior and push them out. And I think that's part of the hesitations I have with coming forward about autosexuality. But the true essence of autosexuality, I don't think is demonstrated that way. And that's the difference. Because there's other types of sexual classifications, right? Like voyeurism, exhibitionism, those
exhibitionism.
things. Yeah. And I think like there is something to be called out there because we shouldn't be encouraging that. But to say that there isn't an autosexual typology for gender dysphoria and those emotions that come with it, that is the essence of where I think, we can see that the gender criticals don't necessarily get the story all the way right with no one benefits from transition. It's all, harming yourself and all these, things. So it's a complicated landscape. And I'm happy to take any platform that, like the fact that she puts me and Taff on there. And yes, she has at times, every now and then it kind of comes up, it bubbles up as like, oh, these, like you all said, cross-dresser fetishists are ruining it for everyone kind of thing.
Right.
Sure, it comes up, but she has never, ever said anything about don't talk about autosexuality on the pod or anything like that. She is very, I see her very much as a friend, as a good friend. And we're in this, and we have some production issues in terms of we haven't gotten our pipeline all down, and we're slow on our episode releases. And it's difficult because she's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But she's a go-getter, and I think she does have a sensitive awareness for autosexual dysphoria. But I do think that it's tough to hold it in tension with the issues of what's being called out by like the gender criticals, with the whole stigmatization of overt sexuality and making it really look like trans women in particular could be very predatory.
Right.
And I don't know.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
No, it is. It is. And I said from the beginning, like, I completely understand. I'm also glad that she's giving you and Taff an opportunity to talk about this openly. I think you two in particular are really great representatives for the autogynephiles out there. I really do. I think that. And I also see why they're like feelings about her aside, about Brianna aside. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like, this is a good platform, like it makes sense. And you all are bringing really important perspectives there. Yeah, I think, again, like, my frustration is, and this is a frustration that is like, I do go at her, but like, for the most part, my attention is on gender criticals. Because I have a similar frustration, which is at my point in this journey, in this gender journey of understanding what's going on here, I have no patience for people who I perceive to be lying for a political end. This is what I think is going on the gender critical side. And like Aaron and I talk about all the time, like, this is like 101 stuff that everyone was supposed to have graduated from by now. Like, we've been in this conversation for too long for us to still be using youth, like, just to be
internalized
lying.
homophobia and stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. And so it's that same flavor of frustration. But I could tone it back. It wouldn't hurt me to tone it back a little bit, because I really don't mean to be cruel. But yeah, no, I'm glad we got to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah.
And I do
totally
recommend Dollcast. I do recommend Dollcast. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Check out Dollcast. I'm going to do a little shameless promotion. Yeah, no, for sure. And I totally get it too. I mean, look, there's a lot of reasons to be frustrated with the way things have gone, because there's a lot of perpetuation of unnecessary noise when it comes to all this. And I think you all call it out the most, basically the most I've ever seen. And
we attack every side.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I'm just like, I just want to leave space for more and more people to recognize this middle way, because that's really how I see it.
Yeah.
And
you're doing a great job. You have a great tone, like, you're very likable and relatable and like, and diplomatic in a way that I am personally incapable of, but I respect it and very much appreciate it.
Everyone has a role to play. It's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
True.
Great. Well, okay. We are way past the time. So.
Yeah, it's okay. You can blame me. I did a lot of meandering, and I forced like 5 more conversations during our wrap up. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm really happy that we did this, and I think that people are going to get a lot from it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Schyler.
Well, thank you all so much for having me on. Like I said, I've been watching this and I'm a fan, and now I'm here. So hopefully people like it.
Yeah.
I'm sure they
cool.
will. Yeah, thanks so much.
Great.
Thank you.